For those of you who haven't been in a previous webinar with me or haven't met me directly, I am Ben Froese. I'm the user experience user interface consultant at CDH. And I've been here for coming up on 2 years, and I've been doing UX UI for about 8 total in my career. So today's agenda is going to cover kind of half theory, half practice. We are here to talk about custom UX and UI approaches to data visualization, which is a very broad area. So, and specifically, we're going to end the webinar with an example of a technical demonstration in SharePoint Online, and we can kind of apply some of the things that we discussed earlier in this webinar to the practical application. So first thing I want to cover is what is data visualization, what makes it good, and then discuss a couple of the great ideas and principles from Ed Tifty and Stephen Few. Hopefully those names aren't terribly foreign, but if you haven't heard of them before, you've probably heard of the principles at least explained in passing in all sorts of user experience and design conversations and articles. And then we'll get into visualizing data, chart basics, and then I'm going to run through a couple of my favorite libraries that are available for free or cheap, and to end with, as I said, a SharePoint Online example using Kendo UI and REST queries in SharePoint. So without any further ado, we'll kind of jump into it. So this first slide is a picture of a guy named Nicholas Felton, and he publishes the Feltron report. Nicholas is a designer and entrepreneur who lives in New York, and he focuses on translating quotidian data into meaningful objects and experiences. And he's the author of these numerous Feltron reports. We'll take a look at a couple slides and pages from them. He condenses a lot of personal information from the events of a year into a tapestry of maps, graphs, and statistics, kind of akin to an annual report. In a non-traditional manner, and he's got a permanent collection at the MoMA in New York. So he knows what he's doing. So I'm going to jump to the next slide here, which is a page taken out of one of his Feltron reports. I'm not sure what year this comes out of, but what you're seeing on the left is the summation of detail about the types of transportation he's taken. The wavy graph on the lower half shows his preference for walking versus other forms of transportation. You can see in large font type he's indicated or reported that his best form of transportation was a limo on June 12, 2009 with 4 people and company. And then so these are roughly running 10 to 20 or 30 pages in some cases, depending on how much information he's collecting. It is extremely detailed, and he's actually taken this inspiration to create a product called Datum, which you can start following in his footsteps and collect trivial, sometimes information about your life, but to see what kind of patterns emerge from them. And I'll jump to another slide, another page from a Feltron report of a different year, where he shows in some very interesting visual ways what kind of groups of information collected a lot of gravity. You can kind of see it looks like a magnetic field, but that's really an overlay of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and East River on the left, and I believe California on the right. There's Oakland and South Bay, and I can't read the other one. But the idea is that you can take any amount of information and visualize it in some sort of a meaningful way. Now, Nick Felton here, or Mr. Feltron, you can call him that, he goes to great lengths to make it very aesthetically pleasing. Obviously, there's a lot of draw. The color theme is pretty consistent and attractive, and that's good for what this is. This is actually something you can buy, and it's gorgeous to look at, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot. You don't really care how many lattes Nick had or how many limousines he traveled in. It's just interesting. But I wanted to start the presentation off with this because it shows us a couple different things. You can make info visuals out of pretty much anything, and what makes it good and what makes it bad. So one question for the audience is, how do we process information? How many values can we distinguish or remember at any given time? Well, the answer is 5 plus or minus 2. And this is an important thing to remember because when we're designing visuals, it's very tempting to take advantage of the technology that makes it easy to visualize things into graphs and plots and tables, and we can get carried away with how much information that we can provide at one time. And that becomes very overwhelming if we use this piece of information as a baseline. So if you're going to be communicating relationships between information or showing pieces of data, you want to make sure that you're not overwhelming. You're not making your users drink from a fire hose. So keep it succinct. You can extrapolate information between different graphs. You don't have to cram everything into one. And this is where it's important to take a user experience approach. Your audience is ultimately going to be reading this. So you need to think about how they're going to be using this information, what kind of applications does it have for them. And just keep this in mind as we go through the presentation. So in the field of visual rhetoric, there's an acronym called CRAP, which stands for Contrast, Repetition, Alignment, and Proximity. So this is very useful to keep in mind because those 4 principles are going to help you when you're designing the kind of chart or visualization from your information. Because your audience is going to respond to it differently depending on what kind of device they're looking on, if they have any sort of biological precedence, if they're colorblind. There are some very important things here. So color differences, tone value, size, shape, direction, those are elements of contrast. You can communicate different things about information using that principle. Same thing with alignment. You can put things next to each other to indicate a close relationship between the two or a correlation, or put them further away. You can show value indications through alignment. Repetition has a similar effect, and so does proximity. And so there's a lot of detail about this that you can read. But in general, keep the CRAP at the forefront, which is something you don't really hear often. So in thinking about a glut of information, let's say you have a table of sales info, how do you want to represent that information? Well, again, you want to start with your audience. How are they best going to interpret that info? And who are they, first off? What kind of goal do they have to be reading your information in the first place? Is it simple? Can you communicate it with a bar or a table? Or do you have to show complex relationships between them? And so here's just a summary table of a lot of popular different type of charts that you can use. I would very much argue in favor of using simple data first, or simple visualizations first, rather than getting carried away using Pareto or high-low equalizer graphs or Rose graphs or radars, as cool as they are. A lot of times you can convey the message with a lot less effort. And that's going to be easier for your users because, again, they can only, on general, remember 5 to 7 to 3 things at any given time when you're trying to communicate information. So we're looking at a geospatial map here. So this is the U.S. unemployment rate in 2012. And I wanted to share this because, first of all, it is a different type of visual that you can use to communicate information. But second of all, it communicates information differently, not just because it is a map, but in density here. So the color blue indicates where there are higher level, or I should say the darker the color blue, the higher the incidence of unemployment occurs. So you don't even need to see any numbers on this map, but you can see where the highest afflicted areas of the country are, and that's looks like California, Michigan in particular, and the Southeast, and Alaska to a degree. So you can communicate some important things very quickly without a ton of detail. Another example is this slide for U.S. commercial flights from 1995 to 2008, and this is kind of a heat map, which, if you're involved in web design, you're very familiar with, where high numbers of, or I should say, high numbers of clicks or high activity is represented in green, and red is a lack of interaction. So this is kind of translated to a commercial flight for, as I said, 95 to 2008. And you can start to infer some interesting things from this map. First of all, the year, or I should say, where the year transitions, that's going to be our winters, and so you can see a drop down of activity there. So there's a preference not to travel. Specifically here in 2001, does anybody know what happened there? What might have caused that? Yeah, 9/11. So And that's obviously a very historically remarkable time period, but you can make that assumption very quickly just by seeing that. So, good data visualization is contextually dependent, and I spoke a little bit about how you need to analyze your audience. You have to have some understanding about what their needs are, how they use the information, how statistically savvy they are, how they consume that information, what they're consuming it on, and what they need to do with it. So that's part of it. And then the other aspect I'd like to discuss is the expert opinion of Ed Tifty and Stephen Few, who are statisticians and professors in the field who have pioneered principles and technologies based on those principles. So first, an example of how your audience and your data are going to have a very important relationship. So this is actually sheet music for a Foo Fighters song called Everlong. Now, I argue that this is data visualization. You're showing a relationship of math and sound and speed and tempo, and it does so very nicely. It's black on white, and you can print it off. You can take it with you anywhere, and assuming that someone knows how to understand this information, they can utilize it, and they can receive the result they intend from utilizing it. This next slide is a screenshot from a video game called Rocksmith, which intends to do the same thing. It shows you how to play this music, or shows you how to play Everlong on your guitar, but it requires a PlayStation or an Xbox, and it requires that you have a guitar to plug into it, and it's also dependent upon a screen and speakers and a whole bunch of other tech-heavy requirements. And there's obviously a huge disparate connection between these two things. They aim to communicate the same thing, but their audience is different and their intentions are different. This is primarily entertainment, and the prior slide is for, well, entertainment to a degree, but also for functional use as well. So keep those kinds of things in mind when you're designing for an audience and how they're going to be using your information. And this slide I wanted to throw in, it's colors and culture. I don't intend for you to read all the detail, and frankly the white type isn't very strong on the gray background, but different cultures respond to color differently, and that's very important when you're going to be creating data visualizations that are going to be reaching into different parts of the world. Specifically, finance, obviously green and red have very clear interpretations. Red is not good, green is not, or green is good. But make sure that you do your due diligence ahead of time, and you make sure that if you're creating themes or using color as a crucial aspect of your data visualization, that you go through and you make sure that these things are going to be understood correctly to your design. So let's move into the principles from Edward Tifty and Stephen Few after him. Edward Tifty is an American statistician and professor emeritus of political science, statistics, and computer science at Yale University, and he's noted for his writings on info design and as a pioneer in the field of data visualization. So these are his 5 principles, and we're going to go into them one by one. So the first one is enforce visual comparison. You want your data visualizations to make your audience draw conclusions faster. So you want to remove all the clout. We process with our brain, so when we have fewer optical distractions, we can make our assumptions and our decisions a lot faster. Use thickness, color, and weight. Compare an adjacent space versus over time, and what that means is you want to utilize a comparison or relationship between your data points. If you remember back to the visual rhetoric, you want to use contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity to help usher those points forward. The second principle he has is show causality. So show how one thing makes another occur. Reinforce the meaning of the content, and no point is conveyed without it. So causality is really important with, for example, line graphs. You can see how times of the year values will change, and that's going to be, you're indicating a relationship with time over, or space over time. And that's going to help as you look over multiple periods of time to see how patterns emerge, and you can make better informed decisions based on what kind of causalities emerge from that info. His third principle is show multivariate data. So show data on more than 2 dimensions. And I would just put a footnote on this and say, only show it on more than 2 dimensions when it's applicable. Sometimes 3 dimensions can be hindering. Again, it can be distracting to the eye, and you can probably convey your point without it. But multivariate data does draw in the user, and it adds more usefulness to the information. Again, contextual, understand how your audience will use this information, and if it's applicable, go ahead. As fourth principle is integrate all visual elements. So use text, images, and numbers where appropriate. Don't push context to a legend or a title, and don't make the user learn your system. Additionally, if you're going to be using text, only use it when it's appropriate. The whole principle, I should say, around this is minimalism. If you can convey information with the fewest amount of elements, that's what you need to aim for. Because once you start relying on explaining with text and arrows and all sorts of different colors and 3D shapes, you've probably lost your point. And most pieces of data visualization are going to be, in their granular form, communicating relationships between 4 to 10 different data points, and that can be done on 2 dimensions with very little additional text or images. And his fifth principle is content-driven design. So you want quality data, relevance, and integrity. Now, I almost think that this should be his first point, because when you're communicating information about data, there's an assumption that it's good, that it's transparent, that it's been vetted, it's accurate. And that, when we discuss later down about a practical example here about pulling data and representing it, you want to make sure that it's curated properly so that your criteria for including it in a content management system, for example, or a list or a database, that it's being put in there correctly, that it is checked for accuracy, and that it is current and updated. All right, so that was Edward Tufte's 5 principles. We're going to move on to Stephen Few. Now he's kind of new on the scene. Tufte's been espousing on his principles for at least decades. But Stephen Few's worked for over 25 years, so he's no spring chicken as an information technology innovator, teacher, and consultant. As the principal of consultancy Perceptual Edge, he focuses on practical uses of data visualization to explore, analyze, and present quantitative business information. So there's a little bit of overlap between these two principles, or these two sets of principles, but some are explained a little bit differently and might stick with you a bit more. So we're going to go through these one by one as well. So first core design principle for displaying quantitative information. Display neither more nor less than what is relevant to your message. Again, take a minimalist approach. You only need to show what is necessary, reduce it to any visual bloat to that point. Second principle, don't include visual differences in a graph that do not correspond to realistic comparison. It's very easy with the technology that we have available to show how there might be, or you can infer certain kinds of assumptions about how data is relating to one another. So you need to be mindful of that as you're making these designs. The third principle, use the size and location of objects to encode quantitative values. This one is kind of similar to number 3 from Tufte's. Number 4 is differences in values should be portrayed accurately and start from 0. You want to make sure that when you're working with large data sets that the numbers are being communicated as they would in their natural environment. So percentages, currencies, number levels, and all those things need to be represented as they would in their natural environment. Number 5, do not connect values that are discrete, suggesting a relationship that does not exist. Some data points can be, or they can exist in a vacuum and communicate an idea without having to be related to another piece of information or another series of data. Number 6, emphasize the information that is most important to your message, and so you can do that with, again, the design principles of contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity, color, type, images if needed. And then 7, augment people's that's a misnomer, it says 5, it should be 7. Augment people's short-term memory by combining multiple facts into a single visual pattern. So that kind of harkens back to the idea that you can only hold relatively 5 plus or minus 2 facts or concepts in your working memory at any given time. So again, the whole point of visual information design is that you're releasing your user from having to read a wall of text. You can create meaning with visuals and doing so in a succinct manner. So there they are all together. And this is going to be made available to the public too, I believe. So if you're interested in reviewing these principles, you can go ahead and do that. So what we've just done is discussed basically the theory and the widely accepted knowledge about data visualization in the field, albeit summarized quite heavily. There's a lot of great, I would say, webinars, TED Talks specifically about data visualization. They speak about them in different ways and how it can be useful as a communicator in certain kinds of circumstances. So if you're really interested in more about the theory, there's a lot to get involved with and check out there. So this next section is going to act as a segue between that theory and the practical application, where we're going to do a little bit of coding. But this is kind of a little bit of show and tell about how I and my colleagues have utilized that information to come up with some solutions for our clients. And we won't be mentioning any names, of course, because we are discreet. But this is a screenshot from a cash flow forecasting software which is being built in a SharePoint environment. And what you see is obviously a line graph that is communicating the relationship between actual and projected investments. Down below we've got tables and we've got the graph up above. So a quick word about the tables is they're a perfectly legitimate way to communicate information. It can be, again, very tempting to want to put all of your numbers and relationships into graphic format, but that's not always necessary because sometimes you can get what you want just by reading a table. They've been around for a long time because they are effective. So what we've done here is kind of got a date layout here for our drawdowns, distributions, and our cumulative summary to kind of show change over time. And then up above, we can use that relationship between actual and projected to get a better idea of how well the forecast is compared to the real-world scenarios. So with this kind of historical information, the people who are working in finance over, over long periods of time, you start to see these relationships emerge or patterns or maybe problems, and you're asking, like, why was the projection so much higher than the actual? And you can go back and you can check your records, but this kind of thing makes it easier for you to pick out those problems rather than just looking at a giant Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes you need graphs to highlight the problem quickly. And here's another screenshot from that same tool. This is a page that summarizes all of the investments in a single portfolio. And again, we're relying on a table and a graph below to show the drawdowns, distributions, and the cumulative net cash relationship between these. This is, again, useful because with investment portfolios, you want to know how much money is being invested or divested from it. And seeing an average in the blue line is going to kind of help you get a better idea about the behavior of these portfolios or your products over a period of time. And then next slide, this is, again, another table with a little bit of detail about the market value. And what I like about this page here is if you look at the legend for the graph, you can see that there are what is represented: secondaries, primary private funds, private co-investments, direct investments, CAGR minimum, and CAGR. Now, you don't necessarily have to know what those things mean, but the fact that they can all be represented simultaneously in a graph on this page acts as a very useful dashboard. And that through line has tooltips, which is pretty cool. And we'll be able to check out some of this behavior because these graphs are being built with Kendo UI, and that's what our technical demonstration is going to use shortly. So again, I wanted to kind of highlight how we're building these solutions in a SharePoint environment. We've got data that's being held in either SQL databases or at a very rudimentary level lists. and we're able to pull that information and represent it in a useful way on the front end. And these next two examples I want to show you are kind of non-traditional data visualization, but they are data and they are being used in the web, so I thought it would be useful for us to show this, specifically that they are in SharePoint environments. So here is a weather and a traffic app, which is pretty useful. This client has a very large employee base, and they are located around the country, so they wanted to be able to provide some information about what your workday is going to look like and your traffic. A lot of the employees use this. This is the first page they look at in the morning. It gives them news layouts. So it's a heavily utilized piece of information. So this is just another feature that allows them to be better informed. And with the same client, we worked to build them a team collaboration site. So different working groups come together and use these project sites to develop products or projects or create presentations, and for a lot of different reasons. They're all SharePoint based, which is nice because this feature is a scrolling gallery of all of the working of this particular site. And why I wanted to share this as a piece of data information is it's showing employees' faces, their names, their emails, their locations, their skill sets, and their strengths. And this is really valuable because, again, this client has a large user base. Sometimes you're going to be working with someone you've actually never met, and this is going to allow them to personify their coworkers, which sounds kind of weird, but we do work in a world where telecommuting is extremely common, and so it allows you to form a more human connection with your teammates, and you get good at it, and that can even lead you to have some insight into someone that you can use as an assistant or a counselor on certain kinds of projects or even just problems. So that concludes the webinar slide deck. This is where I like to transition into a technical demonstration, and I'll kind of walk through. This is going to be tech heavy, so those of you in the audience, please speak up if it's going too fast, and I will do my best to expound upon maybe some of the detail of what's happening. I'm going to go at a slow pace, but just in case. Okay, I think that my screen should be showing to those of you in the webinar room. Those of us here in the physical meeting room, I don't think this is sharing the way I want it to. Shannon, if you're online, can you just confirm that you're seeing my desktop?
Your desktop is not being shared currently.
It is not. Okay. Okay, how about now?
No.
Okay. All right. Oh, come on. GoToMeeting is being very temperamental today. How's that? Got the pause button is the only choice I've got, so it should be showing.
We are not seeing your desktop.
Okay. Well, there might be a problem with the projector.
Oh, there it goes. It's up. You're good, Ben.
It's up? Okay. Okay. Good to know that there's a bit of a lag. Okay. So where we are right now is the demonstration page. So this is SharePoint Online in Office 365. And what I wanted to do with this technical demonstration is show how we can take lists with information that we use for various purposes, and we can perform REST queries on them to pull that data and manipulate it in a way that allows us to represent that data in a data visualized infographic of sorts. And the third-party tool that I'm going to be using today to kind of facilitate that is called Kendo UI, which is you do have to purchase licenses for it, but I'm going to provide some other options that can do kind of similar jobs with this data so that you can reach a similar effect. One of the reasons why I chose to use Kendo is because it is super easy and does take a lot of the work out of actually programming visuals. So you can just focus on making sure that the theme and representation of that data is to your liking, and also making sure that your data is, as Tifty said, to be transparent and accurate. So the first example I want to walk through is this project list. We obviously use SharePoint lists to store tons of different information, but this example is a project list with budgets and actuals. So we did look at some screenshots from a financial forecasting interface, and this is going to be very rudimentary, but I want to show you how you can take this list, you can pull that info out and then represent it in a similar kind of a dashboard fashion on your page. So the first thing you obviously need is a list that's been populated. Now this is completely made up, so don't worry, these aren't real numbers. We always meet our budgets. So I got one laugh. I'm happy about that. So what I want to do is switch over to SharePoint Designer, and we're going to look at some of the code that makes this possible. So inside the master page gallery, I've gone ahead of time to save you all the monotony, is created a master page, which is based off of the default CL. And I've loaded it up with references to all of our libraries that we're going to need. So in the header, we've got CSS registrations for all of the Kendo styles, which are important because they offer a ton of different themes that you can switch between, which makes it nice when you've changed your mind from a dark to a light layout. Further along, we've got script links to JavaScript. So there's jQuery. That plays really nicely with Kendo. Angular is also a great facilitator for Kendo information, but we're not going to be getting into that today. It is a little bit outside of the scope. But as you can see, the header of this master page is loaded up with the references, and then down below here I've got 3 custom scripts that are being referenced with a SharePoint script link. They are staff feature, staff graph, and project budget. And then I'm going to crack those open. We'll look at the guts, see what's really happening there. And one practice that I've gotten into that might be helpful for those of you who are working with calling in JavaScript files and libraries through the master page is doing what we call a utilizing some attributes in that tag for on-demand. That allows us to perform a callback after the content of the page is loaded, so that way we don't have any interference between libraries or code that we. So with these set, what we can do is reference them down below, which I will show you here, using the SB script on demand execute function, and then this just waits for everything until they call it, which is helpful because these scripts are going to be checking if there is a specific div element on the page before they even bother rendering. So that is the gist of the master page here. Now, the first example, as I mentioned, is going to be for the project list. So we're going to take a look at the project graph, or project budget file. So what we're doing here is, first off, just checking that the document's ready using jQuery, and then we take a look to see if the page has, in fact, our div element with the class of project budget. So let's flip over to the page, make sure it is there, and then we can jump back. So in the interest of time, I went ahead and I added 3 web parts. They are all script editor web parts, which are kind of nice if you're doing these automated visuals, because as Kendo requires, you just need a placeholder and your JavaScript and your data do the rest of the work. So it's really as simple as having a div element. Now we're working with the budget graph, so these have been commented out. If I pull the commented out characters, we've got a div with the class of project budget. So I'm just going to click insert, and I'm going to save. And then that's going to put a live div there on the page, which is going to satisfy our JavaScript, which is looking for that before it runs any code. I'll just get this little control out of the way. So what we can see is a graph here. So this kind of looks similar to one of those screenshots I showed earlier. This is, again, using Kendo. So it provides a ton of features, and I'll show you some of the configurations for that. But mainly what I like is you don't get a ton of detail from a glance, which is nice because, again, if we're just trying to create a relationship between these 2 lines, you don't really need to see how much it is exactly. But we can feel satisfied that they are very close. The actual and budget are very close here. The tooltip allows you to go over these nodes, and then they'll give you a little bit more detail about how much that value is. So looking at our base categories here, we've got the names of those projects, just as our list indicated, and then the budget and actual values are being represented here. Another cool thing you can do with these Kendo graphs is you can mute the visuals for certain data series, especially when these can get a little bit busy and crowded. It's nice to be able to remove to take a look at single data series at any given time. So let's take a look at the code that makes this possible. So as I promised, I wanted to show you how to do REST queries, which is my preference for getting info. You can do CSOM and use camel query, but that can get a bit messy, and this is, as I found, been just a better way to work. So these AJAX queries are calling the API, or I should say the REST endpoint. So you can get this for any list. In fact, you can actually type this into your browser to see the kind of code that you would get returned from this call. And I should point out here that SB page context info.web absolute URL is just looking at a relative path for the website that you don't have to fill in every time. You just need to indicate this. So let's go take a look at what this would look like in the browser. Here we are at our project list again. But if we go all the way back down to Ben Demo and then type in that code for the API endpoint and hit enter, we're going to get a glut of information, which we can't really do much with right now, but this allows us to parse through these values and create data objects or arrays and start to manipulate that information. And ultimately, that's what makes it possible for us to take values for each of these project budgets and represent them here. This can be really handy if you're trying to kind of toggle what kind of values you're getting. You can actually create filters on these items so that you can only get returned items that meet a certain criteria. And there's a great reference on MSDN for how to go about doing that. So down below here, we've got our query, and if we get a successful return, and we do, you saw that huge wall of text is going to be coming in, so then what we can do is use jQuery to kind of iterate through that and start to create arrays based on each of those. So once we've iterated through completely, we call our graph builder array, and then we send in the categories, budgets, actuals, and I put averages in there, which we don't actually see on the front end, but what we're then doing is calling that graph builder, and those parameters that get sent through are then used here in the Kendo chart call. So just to pause for a moment, the reason why we're using Kendo or any third-party libraries to help our visualization is that they take a lot of the work out, right? So you can see how simple this is. We're just finding our div placeholder, and then we're calling Kendo chart on it, and we can dictate the theme and the look and feel of that chart, the title of it, if there's a legend and where it's located, all here in this simple line of code. So the series is going to receive our arrays, and then we just name them here, and then our categories are then dictated again by that category array that we established earlier. And here with the tooltip, we can make that visible or not. All of these parameters are easily configured. So obviously I'm a big fan. Now I will just hit the pause button real quick to go over a couple different options because I'm not getting paid by Kendo, and I don't want to be. But JChartFX is a library that's really useful, and you can get free licenses to develop with and work in non-production environments. And they're very robust. You can do almost as much as you can with Kendo with a couple caveats, but there's a great API, smart connectors, and it'll take in JSON objects as data, which is exactly what we're doing with Kendo as well. So I recommend JChartFX. ZingChart is also pretty good. It doesn't have as robust features as JChart, but it's free, and you can do a lot with it as well. And then a third that I wanted to point out is data-driven documents, which this is kind of an overwhelming site, but you can do a lot here. This is absolutely free, and their GitHub has some really great examples of how you can visualize data using their library. And just from the visuals here on the banner, you can see that there's a ton to choose from. So it's very robust. All right. So this is kind of a fast overview of how that project budget code works. But we saw what the visual result looks like on the front end. So there's two other examples that I would like to walk through using a different list. And that is our people skills list. So here what I've done is created a list that takes names of our consultants at CDH and then put together a pretty brief list, a non-comprehensive list of all the skills that any of these individuals can provide, which is really great for example, project managers who are looking for certain skill sets for certain projects need to be able to fill it. And then also quarter capacity. I'll explain a little bit more about this, but it's going to help us evaluate if somebody's available or not at any given time. So what I want to do with this information is populate it into a grid that we can sort and use as a tool to help better identify people based on their skills and their availability. So if we go back to SharePoint Designer, I created a JavaScript file called staff feature. So this is ostensibly running off of the same kind of format as that other lightweight example that I showed earlier. So we're looking for a div called staff grid, and then we're going to execute this. Now, there's an important caveat here. This SP, script on demand, execute or delay until script loaded prevents our code from running until a certain JavaScript file has been loaded beforehand. So this is important because the SP user profiles.js helps us evaluate the names of our users based on this column. And it's kind of misleading. We see there's my name and then my title, and I don't have a avatar image, but all of that is kind of condensed into a data object that is not going to return that information when we query it. We need to process it based on an ID number. So the reason why I'm mentioning that at all is that's why we need SP user profiles here first. So it checks that, then it'll run. So as we move down here, we've got another AJAX call, same format. Now here's an example. It's commented out line. I wanted to just include to kind of highlight how you can identify your results differently. We're filtering based on a value called featured. Now we're not actually going to use that, but this can be helpful if you have some sort of a data flag that you're using to group people. It'll just help you get more contextual information. So as we move down, we've got our data packet. It comes down and we iterate through it, and we're also iterating through the SP user library that helps us get back those values. What really matters is this raw array here, which gives us our names, the skills, and whether they're available or not. So I mentioned that the values in that list have a capacity for a quarter. So the idea being, if you have access to an individual's capacity for the current 3 months, you can see if they are at full at 480 that they can't be billed for any permits. I should say they don't have any other capacity. But if they're under, then you know that they'd be good candidates for more work. So what we've done here is taken that number and evaluated it in just a simple function here. All this amounts to the same graph builder getting pulled or called, and here we see another Kendo compiler, and this is actually a lot shorter than the other example that we looked at. So this is a grid, a title, and then these are some configurations that don't mean much now, but we'll get to see what they look like that help us take advantage of some really nice user interface features. And then we've got our theme, and then our columns, and then the data source array is that raw array that gets put through here. So why don't we see what that looks like? So we can see that here we've got our names on the left, skills in the middle, and availability on the right. We're not even getting the values for the quarter capacity here because that's all just been calculated by an algorithm ahead of time. So this is one of the great features with Kendo is their groupability and filterability. You can actually click on any of these column headers and they're going to, if it's strings, you can alphabetize, or by number values it will help you filter just as you would expect in any modern day program. Skills work kind of the same, but this is a little bit janky only because the skills are basically paragraphs of text that doesn't really do anything for you. But availability does. You probably want to know who's available and who's not very quickly. Now, to go a step further, you can take advantage of the groupability feature where if you click and drag the column header into this area, so long as it's activated, it's actually going to give you a visual of who's available and who's not. And you can, I believe, do multiples, yeah, while maintaining that filter. So that would be a real easy way for me as a project manager to come in and say, I need to know who's available first. All right, well, okay, we've got 5. And then I can take a look at the skill sets. I could alphabetize if I wanted to, or I can even group that way, which is getting a little bit granular, maybe for any practical use, but you get the idea. You can also paginate down here. If you have a ton of results in a large company, you can determine how many are viewing, or I should say, how many results you get per page. And, it provides a ton of contextual control. So again, just to kind of reiterate, what we've done is taken the values from a SharePoint list. We've used REST query to pull that information and then provided changes in our JavaScript and then rendered that into a visual diagram or a data visualization here with the help of Kendo, or in any other further cases you might use a different third-party library. But those are essentially the steps that you would take in your own SharePoint Online environment. So I know that was kind of quick. I am going to be providing all this info to you. The code's pretty easy to kind of slap in. So that'll get made available with the presentation. And that kind of concludes the end of my webinar segment.
Thanks, Ben. We wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and we will stay on the line for a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the questions pane, and we will pose those questions to Ben, get them answered for you, and we'll also be sending out a survey to get your feedback on the presentation following the end of the webinar. And if you would like, you can go ahead and fill out that survey, and everyone who fills out the survey will receive a $5 Amazon gift card for giving us your feedback. We'd really appreciate it. So if any of you have questions, go ahead and ask away. All right, Ben, our first question is, Kendo or JChart compatible with SharePoint 2013 or 2010? I think you're muted, Ben.
You can't hear that either. How's that?
Good.
All right. Apologies. Where was I? Oh, yes. I believe that they are both compatible in either environment. What I was trying to explain while I was on mute is that Kendo UI does frequent builds, and I know that they have legacy libraries that can be used, so you would want to take advantage of that. Again, there's an issue of kind of free versus not, so that's something to consider. Kendo is, again, plays really nice with Angular, but if that's not a huge concern, you can probably get by just all with JChart.
All right, if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. If you do come up with any questions later, feel free to email myself or Ben My email is shannoni@cdh.com and Ben's is benf@cdh.com. The presentation will be made available to all attendees, and we hope you have a really great day. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Ben.
Yep, thank you.